Hello and welcome. My name is Jay Bernardis. I'm the CISO at Anecdotes, among other things. And today we are talking about Beyond the Checkbox, reimagining trust in the age of AI, the data-driven GRC. But hopefully this will be somewhat interesting, mildly useful, and partially entertaining. And I hope we'll take you on a journey. I am a storyteller when I think about things. I don't tend to think in technical facts or in details, but also in the things in my life that have meant and taught me lessons. So let me tell you a story. Every year, my wife chooses where we're going on Valentine's Day. And a number of years ago, she chose to go to the Lake District, which for those who haven't known and are now actively Googling, it's a beautiful, green, rolling, hilly part of England with multiple lakes, hence the name. And if you've also not noticed my voice, this is where I'm from. So this sounds like a great idea. But often if you've done the quick calculations in your head, you'll realize that Valentine's Day is in February, and England is not known for the world's greatest weather in February. So we set off from Sheffield, where I live, about 3 hours drive away, and it started to rain. There is no great shock in England when it rains. However, that rain turned to ice, to sleet, and then to hail, and then to snow. This is a time when we didn't have dynamic sat-navs. It couldn't change based on weather conditions or reroute based on changes in my route on the way. It was pre-programmed with a map that it had, and it was going to follow it. I got to the Lake District and I started to head up this, which is Hard Knots Pass. It's one of the steepest roads in the UK, an average gradient of nearly 30% covered in switchbacks. It's horrible to ride on a bike, which I've done a lot of times. It's very bad, almost impossible to drive in a car, and impossible to drive when it's snowing. And lo and behold, we got stuck. So what I did at that point, as any good husband and man would do, is try to dig the car out, turned it around and put it back on the road. Now, here was quickly the problem with a non-dynamic sat-nav. As I thought I was following a new route, it quickly turned me back into a different side road to take me up onto this pass, where I quickly got stuck in a snowdrift and could not get out. We were there for about 3 hours while I tried to dig and turn and spin the car back out before one of those strange people who has a fascination and a love of actually driving 4x4s for no other reason to prove they can, came and pulled us out, at which when I drove home, the only thing I learned that day was after about 9 hours of total driving and 12 hours of being there and having achieved nothing and gone nowhere, I realized that when you don't have dynamic or real data, you're stuck. You are reliant upon whatever information you can get. It pretty much ruined the day and ruined the weekend, and I had a fairly unhappy wife. Here she is, speaking of my wife. With data, though, you're free. This was the most recent trip that we took to the Dolomites. Now, we again did not do our research. I tend to travel quite a lot for work, and when I got home, I simply put some things in the suitcase and off we headed. Now, I checked the weather for where we were flying into, and there it was quite warm. So we packed t-shirts and shorts and light layers. Now, we got into Verona, at which point my wife checked the weather for where we were actually going in the Dolomites. And as you can see, it was not warm. But North Face had a great day. Don't want to reveal how much we spent in North Face that day. But with dynamic information, knowing what the weather was going to be like where we were going, we were able to prepare for it in advance, and we had an amazing time. The difference between those two journeys, one without data, where we got stuck, we ended up going back home and miserable, and the one with data, where we made changes and adaptations and prepared ourselves to have the best time that we possibly could, were very different experiences. And taking that as the premise for why data matters in GRC is what we're going to talk about today. I've got another story. So in 2021, I ran the London Marathon. I was given only 8 weeks of preparation, and I managed to complete a time at 5 minutes 31 per kilometer, or a sub 4 hour just for that total marathon time, which is good. I was happy. I ran the same marathon 3 years later, and if you notice, I am 50 minutes less in time. I then ran a half marathon that same year, which if you notice again, I've gained another 30 seconds per kilometer, and would have in fact finished a marathon at this point in under 3 hours had I doubled the distance and been able to sustain the pace. Now, this is all very interesting. I know you're thinking, why on earth do I care about your running or your holidays? Let me give you the reason why. And the reason is what happened in between. And the answer is this. Now, some of you might know what this is. Many of you probably don't. It's an app called Runner. Now, Runner is an app that provides dynamic training. So you effectively say, within reason, I want to be able to run this distance on this date in this time. I want to run a 3 hour marathon. It will give you a training program of whatever weeks it thinks is reasonable. And in each of those weeks, it will give you a combination of runs. Now, in each of those sessions, what it's going to do is actually measure your performance by using your Apple Watch or whatever else other device you have against your predicted sessions. So if it says run a kilometer at this speed and you don't manage to, the next time you go out, it's probably going to tweak slightly what your training is, and it'll tweak what your time prediction at the end is. And it'll keep doing this dynamically, driven by AI, until you get to a point where you complete your event. And what the interesting fact is why does data change outcomes? And data changes outcomes because it drives training differently. It drives behavior differently. Now, anytime I've done an event with Runner, those two, and I've done multiple smaller events in between, its forecast time for me has been within 1 to 2 minutes, which over the course of a 3-hour, 10-minute marathon is pretty staggering. And that's because it's adapting and allowing you to adapt according to what the data says. The data says that I can run this fast comfortably. My heart rate is still comfortable at this speed that's pushing me to, and therefore it adapts as training continue across the linear path, which gets me to the point of being sufficiently capable to meet the goal that I've set. Or it will say, you can't do this, Jake, and it will give me a lower outcome. So it's adapting to what my forecast is, adapting my training to meet that, and I'll hit that number instead. So data changes outcomes because A, it drives different behaviors, because you train according to what you need to do, not what you think you should do. But B, because at the point that you're focused on learning from data, you can actually continue to make the right decisions for your own progress. This is what one looks like. Yeah, we talk about the easy run, a long run, a tempo run, a mile repeat, and it's showing what the paces are and the distances are. And it's showing in those cases that I managed to do all those training things. So it continued to give me the various performance metrics against what I'd done. Now, without data, you're just running. Let me give you a reality of that. If you go out and run a 5K every day, you will get fitter, but you won't get faster. Within a reason and degree you will, but you'll hit a plateau and you'll stop. Because effectively you're just going and doing the same thing over and over again. And there's a common saying that says that if you intend to improve by doing the same thing repeatedly, that's the definition of madness. And the same is true in running. If you want to get better, you have to do different things. You have to tailor your running. You have to learn from the data that's presented and focus and continue to get marginal gains, as that famous book from Dave Brailsford is. So let's get back to why we actually joined the conversation. What is compliance? I love asking this question. I wish there was people who could answer right now. But the reality is that compliance is difficult to define. Compliance is a different thing to many people, and it's very subjective. For me, compliance is the translation of security controls that exist with your environment based on the risks that are relevant and specific to your company and or environment. So compliance is how you translate technical security requirements that are risk-based into a language that other people can understand. External and internal stakeholders being the classic two parties that we want to know. How do you monitor it? Well, you have to find a way, as I did before, talking about the importance of data and talking about running. How do you monitor compliance? You can do external audits. You can do internal audits. But what about if you looked at the underpinning data? Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say a classic one for those who are familiar with Tim Brown and the SolarWinds case. There is a point there which says that there is a password policy about sufficient complexity that should be deployed across all users and devices, and it's not. Now, what if you could monitor that? What if you had the full data set that showed that passwords were sufficiently complex, deployed to all users, service accounts, and devices, and you could demonstrate that? Now, that is monitoring that compliance is effective. What if you monitor compliance by showing how it contributes to business outcomes or business goals? What if you say, we sell sunglasses as a brand. How does my compliance enable us to sell more sunglasses? Well, it enables us to open up geographical markets. It enables us to build trust. It enables us to ensure we maintain and retain our B2C customer base, which again could be directly translated into revenue. And therefore, I'm monitoring the effectiveness of compliance in a way that the CFO and the CEO will understand. How do you know it's improving? Well, similarly, back to my running analogy, you know it's improving because you can see it, right? If you want to look at control improvement, firstly, if your risk register and your non-conformities is going down, then you're theoretically improving. If your audits are always clean, there's no improvement. What you want to look at is maturity. So are you having lower false returns on phishing tests? Are less people failing? Are you having a greater degree of frequency within which users are using the MFA provided, right? Are you having a reduced occurrence of people having to reset their passwords and forgetting them because they're automatically now inherently risky users because they'll use simpler passwords? How do you know security is improving? You find specific metrics that contribute to a compliance posture, and you find a way to see positive or negative trends in those data. Can we not just automate everything? It's an excellent question. I wish the answer was yes. I don't think there is ever a world where we're going to automate away the concept of auditing, the concept of compliance, or the concept of security. I think we will always need a human eye with nuance and subjectivity. What I do think is that we can use the automation of capabilities of machine learning and AI to do a lot more with real data. We don't need to rely anymore on historical sampling basis. We can take full and complete open scoped data and analyze everything. We're not automating the process of being audited, but we're automating the evidence that we're supplying and arming the auditor with to give them a better sense of reality that they can then give continuous, meaningful, if not complete assurance on continuous, real, full data sets. So again, we can't automate the process entirely, but we can significantly improve the reality and accuracy of it by automating the evidence gathering and distribution process. If you go on ChatGPT and put in SOC-in-a-box, this is what you get. And one of the phenomena that we're seeing as an industry is this concept of SOC-in-a-box, and it revolves around compliance or audit automation, this principle of trust management that's common in many companies. Marketing speech. And what that says is actually, well, if you look at a set of common controls inside of SOC 2 or ISO, whatever it might be, then you can pin them back to a set of criteria that are logical tests. You connect via API to various tools or stacks or cloud providers, and you can actually automate those testing processes. Let me give that a much simpler language. There is a control inside of ISO 27001, which will talk about encryption at rest. If I connect via API to AWS as a cloud environment, I can run a test that says, is encryption at rest configured? Yes or no? The answer will come back. The light will go green. It says yes. It populates back into ISO. The auditor comes, sees the green, goes great, wonderful, pass that control. There's a lot of problems in that. The first being, how do I know that the data that it went from is completely accurate? How do I know it's in scope? How do I know that what it's asking is right? When I get a green light, how do I know without seeing the full data set that the actual produced result is correct? Is the auditor now relying purely on the output of that test? And if they're doing so, are they actually contributing any value? Can they provide assurance without seeing the underlying data? Is the auditor now too interconnected with the platform that they lose independence and are no longer unbiased from decision-making processes? So what you've got in this SOC-in-a-box analogy is the fact that you've taken what is traditionally a complex process of an auditor coming in, reviewing evidence against controls, against risk register, seeing how you perform and providing a degree of reasonable assurance. You've now instead got an auditor coming in, rely on green lights without seeing the evidence, not know where it's come from, and then providing a much cheaper, much quicker product, which sounds great, but if it provides no meaningful assurance, then at this point, does it actually have a purpose and a meaning? So how can data change outcomes? Well, as I said, imagine a world where you sampled 99 of 100 employees, right? It's a very strong sample set. And you say that all users have MFA in place and a sufficiently complex password. They've met the requirements of security. Wonderful. What if that 100th user, the one user that you didn't sample, is the one that gets breached? At that point, what you've got is a degree of assurance that you provided, that you gave to your customers and to your stakeholders and made them comfortable, although actually the reality was different. Now, data changes outcomes because they're no longer sample-based. What if we take a full data set, real time, we analyze the entire data set against 100 users, and we show in real data that all users have a password of sufficient complexity, MFA configured and active. Now that is a statement of continuous assurance because it's being checked regularly on real full data sets, and therefore the degree of assurance is significantly higher. So data changes outcomes because you're no longer making guesses or assumptions, you're making analysis and interpretations, and that's real data, and that's the same way that any scientific process would work. Auditing at the moment is effectively a process of educated guessing. I guess because these 25 users are secure that the rest of the organization is. That doesn't build for real trust. That doesn't build for real compliance. That builds for an assumption-based model. And the reality is once you've got data, you're able to make much better decisions. Now, I sit in a CISO chair. I'm sure many of you listening do. And what you've got right now is an ever-broadening scope in your role. At any point in time, you've now inherited IT or SREs or parts of engineering. Security's become a lot broader. I'm sure you've inherited AI. You've probably got CloudSec and are now managing most of the cloud platforms. And this, by the way, is whack-a-mole, ChatGPT. If you've not worked out, I'm not quite sure they are convincing moles, but it was a good start. What you've got now is if you've got the data showing the reality of your posture, showing the reality of your controls and how your governance is configured, suddenly you can make the right decisions. Let's take a great example. We have a product Anecdotes called Policy Guardian. This is not a product pitch, but it's a simple fact or something which I think the world is changing to. We talked about SolarWinds, about this part of the policy about password policies, right? What if we can ingest your governance, your policies, your documents? We can map them to controls and say each of these statements in your information security policy relate to these specific controls. What if we can supply the evidence to those controls and therefore show with real, full, complete data in an automated, continuous way that the things that you say in your security policy are actually happening in your business? At that point, more importantly, you can identify the things that aren't happening and apply the definitely finite, I can speak from experience, the finite resources that you have of people, of technology, and of money to tackle the problems that you need to tackle and to stop spending on the things that you've already resolved. So when you have data, it drives outcomes because you have complete and real and meaningful assurance on a continuous basis, and you deploy your resources on a risk-based approach to tackle the things that really matter in your business to uplift your maturity and therefore enhance the trust that both your external and internal stakeholders have on you and overall improve the security of the ecosystem. Without data, you were just running before. And to continue my analogy, without data, you're just running compliance. If all you do is wait for your SOC 2 every year, supply them the data, tick the boxes, get your certificate, and move on, then how do you know that anything changed in the meantime? You don't. How do you know on the 364 days doing those 2 audits that those things were all still true? You don't. On a sample basis, how do you know that all of your users are intact? You don't. Often you're not even just running compliance, you're kind of walking and hiding, because we all know that you'll protect the auditor from seeing the things that you don't want them to see. Once you give real, actual, complete data sets in a continuous manner, you provide not only to external auditors the capability for real meaningful assurance and therefore real meaningful compliance, but you internally also give yourself the chance to deploy resources on a risk-based approach to tackle real problems. Without data, this whole thing just makes no sense. And in a world where data has become like oil, effectively quite often called black gold, then you have a real chance to do something completely different. But it's not even that straightforward, right? If you talk about automation in our space and the collection of data, everyone goes straight to the bottom level, right? Automate evidence collection from any source and save stakeholders' time. Wonderful. That doesn't really work. And it's because you have to have a layered approach to how this works. If you're going to automate the collection of evidence, you need to map it right. So all these various frameworks and standards and certifications have different control references. They say different things. You have to know if you're going to pull information on a password policy from your password manager or from whatever else you want to, that it maps to all the relevant controls and all the frameworks. If it's not mapped, the whole thing's pointless. You then need to scope it. Again, to my point of when you get a binary response that's green or red light, how do you know that the evidence that you ask the question of is actually the right evidence? If you don't scope the data correctly and you can't see granular, you can't see that data being scoped and therefore explain the rationale behind it, then you're not going to know that you even got the right data in this to begin with in the first place. You then need a reliable, continuous monitoring. Get rid of false positives. A false positive is when something says that it's true when it's not, or that it's not when it is. Get alerted on gaps. If you have continuous monitoring on full data sets, you won't get a false positive saying everything's fine, because you'll always see the anomalous behavior. You'll see those gaps as problems and deploy your resources to fix them. You also need to monitor. So once you've automated the collection of evidence, mapped it correctly, scoped it correctly, and found a way to properly analyze it, you then need to monitor it with alerting and remediation requests. So maybe you want to map it into Jira or map it into Slack or whatever else process you want to do to give you visibility and alerting on what's actually happening. You then need to validate it. So you need to enable a proper and effective government to do actual reviews and approval cycles. So you need to go and validate, is that governance still enforced? Is that control still right? Have we changed what we do? And then above all that, the most important thing for any CISO right now is you need to be able to report it. If you can't report and show against these top 20 controls or against this framework or against this set of child entities, where is the compliance posture at? What's good, what's not? Then the whole thing is effectively meaningless, because your job is really to translate that and to give that information to other people. You want to be able to present back to your board or to your executive leadership team or to your stakeholders and gain trust. And you do that by being able to give concise, accurate, and clear reporting on the compliance metrics that are happening, that are driven at the very bottom from real, complete, and full data. I think there's a few points on this, right? That happy employees are focused on solving problems that matter on with data. We're in an industry where the churn of people in the GRC space and in the compliance space, full stop, is astronomical. And it's because they're bored. Because no one wants to do evidence collection. It's terrible. It's miserable. It's boring, right? But if they're freed from that and now given the opportunity to focus their time and effort and expertise on learning from and on delivering an increase in maturity and in tackling and remediating the problems that you identify, with the data to show that their work was effective or it wasn't, they're a lot more interested. Happy auditors give insights when they're not having to ask for a million screenshots. An auditor who has full and complete data available at their fingertips in the way they want to consume it, whether that's PDF or JSON or whatever it might be, is one who can make quick, accurate, and insightful decisions. They're also able to give valuable additional tertiary insights down the side because they've now been freed from a lot of the time and the mundanity of having to collect all that evidence. Now, happy leaders, people who sit in chairs like mine, know what's going on today because they have visibility into a full and complete real data set. And because they then know what needs fixing. Because if you know what's wrong, you know where to deploy your resources and how best to solve the problems that you have. Ever the question is being asked right now, what about AI? Well, I think here, it's not necessarily about AI in the context of replacing and changing this. It's about AI in the context of improving this. What do I mean by that? There is a world in which many people have you believe that AI will one day replace auditors. We'll have the whole thing done automatically, from evidence source to end of certification issuance. I don't think that's where we're going. I fear the day that there's no human involvement or that there's no nuance and subjective eye. What I do think that AI allows us to do is to do exactly what I'm talking about. If you can take and base assurance on full, complete data sets, even millions of rows, utilizing AI capabilities to analyze for anomalous behaviors or anomalous exits in that data set, you can make quick but very robust assurance decisions. Furthermore to that, if you know with AI that you can use it to ingest documentations, governance, or policies and map them to controls, supported and fulfilled by real evidence, then again, you've got to a place where you've got better assurance. So for me, AI is another layer on top of this. Once you've got that core data and you're able to gather it and to present it and to digest it, you can use AI to really enhance what you're able to complete and achieve with it. If you look at agentic AI, which goes through me because I'm an advocate for machine learning, although it doesn't sound quite as sexy as agentic AI. But what you've got now is the ability to actually deploy and make better, quicker, more frequent, more accurate analysis of large-scale data sets in your compliance stack, which allow you and facilitate you to make better decisions about resource deployment, to improve overall degrees of assurance, to get to a world where you're able to deliver higher levels of maturity, and to get to a space where you're actually delivering a better product in terms of a compliance and assurance posture. That is a whistle-stop tour of my thoughts on the current state of GRC, the reality that we need to drive towards a world in which completeness and accuracy are put at the forefront, that we're not ticking boxes with compliance, but we're making decisions based on full and complete data sets, that we leverage AI capabilities to map, to ingest, and to analyze that data, and that we arm auditors with full and complete data so that their job becomes more easy, more effective, more efficient. I'm sure, and I hope you have multiple questions. If you do, then you can reach out to me via LinkedIn or via my email. I'll happily talk about any of these things. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and I hopefully will bump into you all in human form sometime soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.